Okay, I'm going to ask everyone to take their seats again. We're going to get restarted. Before we start the next session, if I could ask everyone to stop their conversation so we can get started. Zip it. All right, I'm going to ask one more time for everyone to stop your conversation so we can get restarted. All right, great. Well, thanks everyone for, that was a great last panel. Before we move into the next panel, I've had a request from the public to speak, and I'm going to call on that individual now, Michael McCaskill. If you could please identify yourself and your affiliation for the record. You've got 3 minutes to speak. I think the
Is this on?
It
okay,
is.
thank you.
Yes, go ahead.
Hello, my name is Michael McCaskill. I'm speaking as just a citizen and a human. I am, however, on my local community services district for the past 10 years. I've been chair of it for 6 years. Last year, I was chair of my Redwood Region Economic Development Commission at JPA. I am, however, entirely speaking for myself because I just learned about this about 4 days ago. So, first of all, I'm very, very excited that you are embracing sustainable development and environmental goals. I'd really like to point out there was some talk about not cutting things out, but the lowest hanging fruit for an impact in any sort of sustainable or environmental action is divestment from fossil fuels. There's no reforming that industry, and as the beneficiaries and as as CalPERS, you will be caught holding a whole lot of stranded assets, as one of the gentlemen up there was speaking to. And oil in the ground that cannot pumped, which is reflected in current stock prices, will greatly hurt our beneficiaries. The second little point is that I'm concerned about the sustainability of CalPERS in a larger sense, and as an elected official, our budgets work much, much better if we have even and sustainable contributions that we're making for our beneficiaries. And I would much rather pay a little bit more in the short-term future than get into a position where we were suddenly having to make drastic changes to our finances because you were trying to be a little too, conservative. And it seems that there's somewhat not really realistic returns that you're projecting in the future. And I would much rather that you kind of had more realistic returns projected. And sort of the last impact-related thing is that in talking about doing more of the private equity investments, I would really appreciate it if you would bring that in-house, because not only will you save on the fees and the layer of fees, but also, there's risk-adjusted versus actual, and you'll be able to have a closer hold on that. And also, as one of the people was talking about the timelines of the private equity investments, you might sort of not realize as much of your development sustainability goals because you're worried about those timelines. So please bring private equity in-house and please divest from any fossil fuels, because that will both further the sustainable development goals and greatly, greatly benefit the beneficiaries in probably the midterm future, and unless there's no future for us. So thank you very much for your dedication, and I have a 4-hour drive, so I will leave you to this, but it's very educational what I heard already, and very, very glad that you are embracing sustainable development initiatives.
Sorry, thank you very much. With that, we're going to continue our discussion on sustainable investments by delving into the vision and direction of our own program. Beth Richtman is back with us to lead the discussion, and Beth, I'll turn it right over to you.
Thank you. Beth Richtman, Managing Investment Director, Sustainable Investments Program. So I'm going to be walking you through the vision for the Sustainable Investment Program. What I'm planning to do with this program is to build a mindset and a resource for the investment office that helps the investment office better be able to identify and focus on the most critical environmental, social, and governance factors that can affect our investments. I want the investment office to understand the biggest threats and opportunities and invest with that insight. My vision is to help the investment office be a better investor. Here we are in Concord, and We're in a conference room, and I'm talking about sustainable investment and sustainability, and there's nothing green in sight. There are no trees, there's no plants, so I thought I'd bring my own plant. In fact, it's a tree. So when I thought about what the right image was for this program, a money tree seemed the right fit. This is what I'm trying to build for CalPERS, a program that helps the investment office sustainably generate the cash flows we need to meet our liabilities. The 4 branches that you can see on this tree are research, advocacy, engagement, and integration. CalPERS has historically been very strong on advocacy and engagement. But the research and integration branches are what needs our dedicated attention now and what I'm planning on building out. Turning to slide 4. So the Sustainable Investment Program's work will be guided by an overall effort to improve the funded status of CalPERS by being a better investor. It's important that we figure this out because other investors are out there getting better and better at analyzing and pricing ESG risks and opportunities. And if we don't improve at this ourselves, we will likely be on the wrong side of trades and the wrong side of societal, environmental, and technological transitions. And we might even take on risks we don't see until we lose money, or miss out on the world's biggest opportunities, some of which you heard about earlier today. CalPERS has a variety of stakeholders with views on how we should approach ESG. Some have told us to do more, and some have told us they'd like us to do less. The whole team and I appreciate the feedback and perspective. But I'd like to take a moment to underscore that the goal of this program is to help CalPERS be a better investor. In fact, we think our approach is squarely in line with our fiduciary duty, and our focus is on better understanding and acting on the various risks and opportunities that can affect our investment returns in support of improving CalPERS' funded status. On slides 5 and 6, you can find quotes from the Harvard Business School and also Bank of America Merrill Lynch showing that we're not alone in believing that a focus on ESG can help us be a better investor. But rather than reading through those quotes, I'd like to give you some examples from our own portfolio. In our real assets portfolio, some of the tools and integration requirements for managers have already started to help CalPERS avoid taking on mispriced risk. For instance, not too long ago, one of our real estate managers was carrying out due diligence on a Class A building. It looked very attractive at first glance. Quality cash flows, great tenant, good credit rating, gorgeous property, it was a new build. But when the manager put on their sustainable investment lens, they discovered an unresolved environmental condition. The risk was large. And they just couldn't put a dollar value on it or a time frame, and ultimately they decided to walk away from that investment and pursue other opportunities. Their discipline and focus on reviewing all the material risks and opportunities that could affect that investment protected our capital. But sustainable investment is not just about risk. It's also about opportunity, including those you heard about today. And in some cases, it's about access to opportunities. One of our private equity managers has told us that they see their strong environmental and social track record as key to helping them source deals. Why? Well, they're in the business of acquiring family businesses. And it turns out that family businesses who've been working, or families that have been working with employees for generations, and maybe even live in the communities where their companies are headquartered, care a lot about who they sell their businesses to. And I wonder about the value of CalPERS' own reputation as a responsible investor and whether we've utilized it to the fullest in figuring out who would like to partner with us and in accessing opportunities. And I think this could be a reputational asset that we might be able to use more fully in our new private equity models. I've heard stakeholders voice concerns about CalPERS investing in renewable energy assets. I wanted to take a moment to point out that the reason we've invested in renewable energy power plants, for instance, is because of the opportunity to basically invest in very stable cash flowing assets that have long-term contracts. And I want to bring up that the most boring part of my CalPERS career so far has been listening in to solar power plant operating calls. Boring, because the sun shined and they generated cash flows. I love boring investments like that. I don't know about you, but I also suspect that both our stakeholders who want us focused on financial return and other stakeholders who would like to see us more focused on societal goals can agree that when we can make attractive returns, delivering cash flow to meet our liabilities, and have a positive environmental or social impact, why wouldn't we? One aspect that's nice about investing in renewable energy assets is that they are also less likely to face the type of regulatory and societal transition risks that fossil fuel power plants and higher carbon risks face. Related to that, a couple weeks ago I was having lunch in the CalPERS cafe, and I chatted up an investment manager in our fixed income group named Paul Kramer. Paul was involved in doing the carbon footprint work that the fixed income group did, and as a follow-up to that, he created a relative value framework for a particular industry. He was looking at the risks, and he included carbon transition risks as part of that review. One observation he made was that the bonds from issuers with lower carbon transition risk had similar return attributes to those of bonds from issuers with higher carbon transition risks. Ultimately, he recommended that the portfolio favor the bonds from the issuers with the lower carbon transition risk, because why wouldn't you, he said. And of course, why wouldn't you, as a rational investor, if you could get the same return, but with a lower risk, lower environmental impact investment? This story illustrates the importance of having good ESG analytics at the point of investment decision making. And it also inspires me and the sustainable investment team to work hard to get the CalPERS investment staff more and better ESG metrics and data related to ESG factors beyond carbon footprinting. CalPERS investors need this information to be able to have more why wouldn't you moments when making investment decisions. But understanding the material, social, and environmental risks and drivers that can affect investments across our entire portfolio and translating those issues into useful investment terms in a systematic and practical way is not easy. And it's going to require collaboration across the whole investment office, and it's going to require the growth and improvement of industry standards for data and reporting. And it's going to require a really strong sustainable investment team. And I have several members of the sustainable investment team here today. Yes, if anyone wants to wave their hands. And we also are recruiting more additional talent to help with the vision. And within the Sustainable Investments Program, the plan is to build and nurture a team with deep and relevant expertise. Let me see, I'm going to turn to team, sorry, slide. Okay. To build and develop a team with relevant expertise at the intersection of sustainability and investment returns. But the vision is not to stop at the sustainable investment team, but rather to work over time to build a mindset across all of INVO that enables identification of sustainable risks and opportunities. Some of this we'll do through formal training, but we're also going to informally train people through our collaborative integration work and research projects that I'll talk about more later in the presentation. Working within the Sustainable Investments team requires an abundance of skills and expertise. And as mentioned, the program will focus on using these skills and expertise to drive investment returns. So back in March, Wilshire presented some recommendations, including that CalPERS prioritize emerging ESG issues, understand resources needed, and properly allocate them, and that we put more focus on translating sustainable investment topics into investment terms. I'll be touching on all of these topics. First, we'll talk about prioritization, which is closely related to resourcing. One complicated aspect of the sustainable investment space at CalPERS is how diverse and numerous the requests are that come in from various stakeholders for us to focus on a wide variety of issues. And in many ways, working in sustainable investment here is the coolest job ever because you're always getting asked to dig into new and important topics. But that also means that resources can easily be tugged in a variety of directions, and sometimes not toward the highest value topics for the fund. As Wilshire pointed out in their comments, in March, we need to prioritize. We need to have a focused and disciplined approach in order to make sure we're spending the most resources on the highest value risks and opportunities for the fund. Turning to slide 10, as I thought about how we are going to focus the program, I looked to investment belief number 3, which talks about how we should consider prioritizing issues that are raised by our stakeholders. Asking us to consider materiality, does the issue have the potential for impact on our portfolio risk and return, as well as considering capacity and whether we could partner with others to achieve success or whether someone else should carry the issue. Turning to slide 11, I'll point out that emerging sustainable investment topics don't just come from stakeholders. They come from many places. They come from external managers, from academia, from the Sustainable Development Goals, from asset classes, and from the curiosity of our own sustainable investment team. But how do we know whether or not to spend significant resources on a topic? We're going to evaluate the potential economic impact of the topic and prioritize the topics that have the biggest potential to affect our returns. Turn to slide 12. This graphic has stakeholder interest on one axis and has potential economic magnitude on the other axis. And what this graphic is saying is that when a topic has high stakeholder interest and also high potential for economic magnitude, we're going to focus on it. And we'll probably focus on it in a louder way, more media attention for that. But when topics have less stakeholder interest, but also the high potential to affect our portfolio, so in a high magnitude way, we will also focus on them, but in a quieter way. But the point is, the gravitational pull of the program will be toward the topics with the highest potential to affect our funded status, to affect our returns. And as new topics emerge, we will plot them on this graph to see how much to focus on them. I do want to be perfectly clear that stakeholder interests will always be taken into account. Indeed, many emerging issues that can affect our portfolio returns are identified by stakeholders. And we appreciate their insights and the often high-quality research that stakeholders sometimes send to us. It's very useful. That said, the amount of focus and resources we will assign to any particular topic will correlate with the magnitude of that topic's potential to affect our returns. My vision is to achieve the highest return on resources that we deploy. And keeping the SI team focused will be key to achieving the effective integration and research work that I'll now talk about. First, we'll discuss integration. So what do we mean by integration? It's a process for utilizing a sustainable investment lens to drive investment insight and avoid uncompensated risk and missed opportunities. The lens will necessarily take on different forms for the different styles and strategies of investment across all of our asset classes. For the various investment functions across INVO, we will work to build out practical and appropriate tools and useful ways of sharing insights on emerging issues. So how will we do this? We will achieve integration through a combination of the sustainable investments team listening to the outside world, including our stakeholders, partnerships, and also traditional and non-traditional sources of information, and then being a highly skilled bridge between sustainable investment topics and the language and tools of investment, translating topics into investment terms, as Wilshire had recommended. An important part of the program we're working to build is an integration services model, including on-demand sustainable investment services for the asset classes. And a few asset classes have already started taking advantage of this. In fact, in the recent past, Sustainable Investment Team has helped real assets review certain environmental risks around 9 investments. And we're working with the corporate governance team on engagement and proxy voting as further described in the appendix. Regarding private equity, we are already engaged in figuring out how to bring strong sustainable investment processes to the development of the new private equity model. These are examples of the pull side of the service model, where the asset classes are asking for our help. On the push side, we will be identifying priority issues, as previously discussed, and then pushing out investment insights about them to the asset classes. Turning to slide 18, turning to our research work, the Sustainable Investment Team will be doing a fair bit of research internally within our team, but we're also going to leverage the larger investment office for some of the investment office research needs. And I'm thrilled to tell you about our new hands-up approach. It's a way to source talent for sustainable investment research and allow a wider access of innovative opportunities to the INVO staff. So about a month or so ago, I sent an email to the entire investment office, and I asked who would like to collaborate with us on 2 new research projects. One is about water, and that one's focusing on water risk and opportunity in line with our strategic plan. And the second, is about disruptive technologies, including looking at the potential social impacts, some of which we heard about earlier today. More than 25 people across the investment office raised their hand to participate in these research projects. And it's exciting to see the enthusiasm as they embark on these research initiatives. And one important aspect of having the teams working on this research be from the asset classes is that they're instrumental in helping inform the scope and direction of the research projects, such that the insights that come out of that research can be immediately useful to them in their asset classes. I'm also hopeful that with this distributed approach to research, it can support our integration effort by getting more staff up to speed on sustainable investment topics and further the sustainable investment mindset across the investment office. And I will mention that the work of our strategic partners, such as Ceres and PRI, is being leveraged for some of this research we're doing. The last research project I'll mention here is the Climate Risk Mapping Project that we're working on with colleagues in the Global Equity and Real Assets program, and also potential outside partners. This is about enabling us to have sort of a sharper ability to analyze climate risks in our portfolio and in underwriting new prospective investments. It's about, if you will, future-proofing our portfolio or making it future-ready, to use the terms of one of our panelists earlier. I'll also mention that outside of the hands-up research projects, we also have 2 members of our fixed income team who are both investment managers working with us on additional research projects to strengthen how we approach ESG integration from a more quantitative perspective. Turning to slide 20. To sum up, by building a team at the intersection of sustainability and investment returns, by prioritizing to focus on the highest value topics for INVO, and through our integration services and approach to research, we're working to expand the sustainable investment know-how and mindset throughout the investment office and be a real partner and resource to the asset classes that helps them practically figure out how to invest around sustainable investment risks and opportunities and be better investors. I look forward to your questions and feedback and to using your feedback in the evolution of the strategic plan, which I will present an updated version of in March. Thank you.
Thank you. Questions from the board? Ms. Brown.
Thank you. How many research projects are you currently working on?
So there are 2 through the Hands Up project and a 3rd through the Climate Risk Mapping project.
You call your project Hands Up?
No, the method is Hands Up.
Oh.
Of how we sourced investment talent. Is that?
No, I just was thinking of Don't Shoot. Okay.
No.
How many people full-time? How many people part-time working with you?
We're in the process of recruiting a few, so I would say we're going to be at about 11 full-time.
Okay. And then when you talk about stakeholders here, like we had a stakeholder here, Mike, talking about fossil fuels, and so he's a stakeholder.
Yes.
So where does the board fit in, staff, vendors? I mean, how do you, I mean, there's a lot of different stakeholders here. I know there's another woman here I talked to from the fossil fuel group as well. So how do you, who's a stakeholder?
Well, I would say it's a pretty wide variety of entities and people who are stakeholders of CalPERS. I think where I see the board fitting in, if you're talking about, let me turn back to.
Or our staff. Or our staff as well.
Yes. So I wouldn't consider staff necessarily a stakeholder. Are you talking specifically about this diagram?
Mm-hmm.
I would consider more stakeholders as sort of outside parties with an interest in CalPERS, if that's helpful. I would see the board as executive leadership.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you. Ms. Taylor.
Yes, thank you, Beth. I really appreciate this presentation. And I think it's a really good presentation. One of the things that I had a question on, though, was, let me find my page.
Get out of here.
You had, you're kind of looking for some views on where to go forward and what you're looking for in terms of the next update for our strategic plan, correct? So I saw that you're looking at our climate risk mapping, disruptive technologies, and water, and I take it that's, water shortage, et cetera, in the world. Okay. And I just wanted to make sure that somewhere in there that we're looking at the sexual harassment and the diversity part of our ESG as we go forward. And I don't know if we want to fit that into proxy season, how we want to fit that in. But I think it's important that we, Ms. Mather had already directed staff, and I think we already have some language, but I also think it's important that we use that in our vetting process as we look at new investments, et cetera. I didn't see it here, and I know that it's not part of our normal strategic plan, but I think it's of import enough, and we're in an environment now that we probably should take that into consideration at this point.
Yeah.
So that we're looking, I don't know how you feel about that, if you want to answer to that.
No, I appreciate that feedback. And one of the goals with this presentation was to not talk necessarily about specific issues, just because I wanted to sort of more holistically talk about an approach.
Right.
That said, as you know, recently the board adopted an updated version of the governance and sustainability principles that does have that language. And those principles inform how we approach things across our total fund.
Great.
So,
I just
thank
wanted
you.
to make,
No,
I
thank
didn't
you.
see it here, so.
Thank you for the
Thanks.
feedback.
Thank you. Ms. Pequin.
Thank you, Madam President. And Beth, thank you so much for the presentation. I really appreciated it. And I had 2 questions on slide 10, which is the prioritization. And I guess the first is, I was curious, and maybe you're still working on how you define materiality, but are you going to look at it on a case-by-case basis, or is there some kind of quantitative aspect to it, or how do you look at that?
It's a great question, and let me see if I can move this forward. So the hope is that as issues come in, sort of new topics, we are going to have a quantitative framework that we're going to use to look at, well, how big could the economic impact be on our basically on our returns and on our fund. So we'll look at the scale of the issue in terms of how many investments does it touch, how much do we have invested in that space, and ultimately plot them on this chart for our internal use when we figure out how to prioritize things. Now, I think it's important to note that when an issue comes in and we work, I guess, through our framework to analyze how it fits, how much resources get devoted to it will have to do with the scale of the potential impact to our portfolio and our funded status, but also we'll think about things like capacity and think about whether there are things we could do. For instance, let's say an issue didn't look like it had, maybe it affects a $10 million investment, so it's a smaller scale for us, but it's something where CalPERS, because of just who we are, could actually have a profound impact by just sending a letter and doing something that's resource light to let a company know that we're interested in a particular issue. We might do that. But where we will really focus on things and have a big strategy and maybe work with outside partners are going to be related to the topics where it's going to have the biggest impact on our fund. So for instance, you might see climate risk might be something that is in the quadrant where it would be the highest potential economic magnitude and also high stakeholder interest. And that is one where we've already got Climate Action 100, but also we're doing this climate risk mapping project. And also we've got an energy optimization program in real assets. And we're looking at those particular sort of high value issues as basically places where we need to come up with a strategy to attack it from multiple different perspectives and I guess means.
And thank you for that explanation. And I think it's a hard context to put it in too, because obviously the resources are finite, and you're all doing a lot of work. But I think sometimes it's harder to quantify the reputational risk. And for example, the Dakota Access Pipeline kind of came out of it came up, and when you look at the actual dollars involved and impact and investment, it wasn't a large amount compared to the total fund, but, I think that's one of those situations where it might be a case by case. And my other question too is about, on that page, partnering with others. Is this continuing the philosophy that we've always had of working with others, investors, like-minded investors, to make a stronger impact, or is this a newer approach?
Yeah, it's a good question. I think we'll definitely consider working with partners. I think that's key, and I guess to make that point, the Archimedes quote about sort of give me a lever long enough and a fulcrum on which to place it and I shall move the world. I think when we think about leverage, we absolutely need our partners. And to understand some of these global issues, we also need our partners' insights. So whether they're strategic partners such as PRI or Ceres, or our global peer exchange, which includes the largest asset owners in the world, we need to work together. And actually related to that, when I came up with this tree image, one of the members of my team said, well, where are the partners on this? And I thought, are they the roots? Are they the soil? Are they the air? But they're a key part of how we will work.
Okay,
Yes.
thank you.
Thank you. I have a question as well. I don't see, I'm pausing to see if any other board members have any questions at this time. Mr. Rubalcava, go ahead.
Thank you. I really appreciate the presentation. I found it very educational, and I'm going to thank you for that. One thing that struck me, a carryover from the previous presentation also, is that what you pointed out is there has to be like a conviction, like a focus, and clearly there's the returns as a reward. But one thing that you mentioned in the Wilshire slide or the recommendations is the need for resources. There has to be resources that helps you prioritize, but there's in the lever, the resources go up, then you can have more priorities. And I thought that's where my colleague here was going to ask it when she asked about how big your staff was. And I appreciate the approach about trying to integrate the whole investment staff. So that was my question. Your priorities that you said right now, that's based on your current resource base, I guess. And do you foresee, is there like a strategic, I'm impressed that CalPERS has this conviction, to make sure that we're planning for the future and future growth, and there's going to be perhaps like a screen of ESG as we start evaluating investment-wide. So I guess my question is, I know you said you're presenting in March. Would that include some sort of long-term where we're going to see your staff grow or your section grow, or how we're going to integrate into the whole mission, I guess? This is my first introduction to this, so I was very impressed. So just looking for what can we see in the future, I guess?
I can make sure that it's on the agenda for March to discuss. But, one of the things that I hope I was able to impart with this is that the goal with this program is not necessarily just to keep the sustainable investment know-how and sort of activities within just our team, but to really be sort of a resource and partner with the entire fund. And I've had many people ask me since I took on this role, so are you going to be where CalPERS does its sustainable investment? Can I send you my ESG-focused fund? Can I, is this how much money is allocated to you? And my thought is rather, and this is, I think, with also the senior leadership of the investment office and our CEO, is that this is not where we're going to do our sustainable investment just in this program, but rather we're going to work on integration across the entire fund. So I'm more, I guess, right now, and this may change. I'm new, and we have a lot of work to do, but I'm in some ways less concerned about how big my exact team is, but also how I'm able to work with the other parts of the investment office. So through this research projects, through our work with the corporate governance team, through having these 2 investment managers and fixed income working part-time with us, I'm looking at this different type of model for resourcing what we work on, so that I'm getting resources we need to work on projects, but also having the dual benefit of having those people who are working with us also developing their sustainable investment lens and know-how, so that when they go back to their asset classes, they bring that with them.
Well, I certainly see that as an attractive objective, right? That is what we want, is for the entire investment office to be thinking about risks and opportunities and identifying across the board, including environmental, social, and governance issues that might impact the performance or the risk or the volatility or the resilience of a particular investment. But then also at the sort of at the big level in terms of the entire overarching the entire portfolio. And so that brings me back to this question of the economic impact assessment. And let me raise a hypothetical. Let's say economic inequality. Obviously, that's an issue that the board has raised for several years. It's part of the ESG strategic plan. It is a bit of a challenging one from an individual investment perspective, or even perhaps an individual company perspective. Maybe you can talk about CEO pay, maybe you can talk about tax, but it is a systemic issue that could likely have very profound impacts on the global economy and market growth writ large. And so how would that factor into this economic impact assessment? I'm still trying to get my arms around it.
So that's a great question, and I'll hopefully be able to give you an update on that in March. So in the appendix of this slides, I don't know if you guys saw this, but we actually talk about how we're going to continue our research on income inequality. And one of the things, with this work, we're going to be reviewing additional academic, but also industry and partnership papers, and looking to identify some consultants to work with us and possible partners. And the goal here, is to sort of answer some of these questions. So, is this an investment issue for CalPERS? And, I think with this, we want to understand, well, where does it affect our portfolio? How does it create risk for us? And related to this, how are disruptive technologies currently creating job displacement, and how might they in the future? So we're thinking about this as a long-term issue that we want to understand. So I don't know the answer to that question yet, but we're asking that question. And some of these are, issues that are going to evolve over time as more information comes and as we get better at analyzing the risks and opportunities. But our hope is that we will develop a framework, and it's still in process, of how we're going to quantify these. Because, at some point, I just want to make sure that our team doesn't get too distracted with small things and miss the big things. So if we can cover the big things that could impact our portfolio and make sure we're prioritizing them, I think that's the key.
Okay, thank you. Any other questions from the board? Ms. Taylor?
Just real quick. Oops. And I forgot about this, or I was going to bring this up earlier, too. The research that you're looking at is the 1,700 academic articles, approximately 1,250 governance, 550 environmental, 450 social. We have a lot more environmental research. And some social, approximately 50 mention income inequality in some way, 5 papers at the December 2017 UC Davis. That was the one that was brought to us, right? Okay. So which I thought was kind of our ending point of research. So what do we, could you, and I think you started to talk about it, could you kind of re-explain to me
Yes.
What the goal of more research is? I mean, is it to find out a way to tabulate, and how would we have metrics around this to invest around it? Is that what you're looking at?
Well, so that was the survey of the academic literature, and it was done, and I think, Professor Brad Barber did comment and present to the board on some of the conclusions reached, but we think there are additional sources of information that could be useful to help us understand and frame this issue, including the World Economic Forum, for instance, and the work they've done, and additional experts. Because I think I guess I was trying to frame this earlier with how we're going to approach sustainable investment, is that we don't think that all the answers are in academia or all the questions. And we do want to make sure we're looking at how other industry groups and how sort of other sources of information are also exploring topics like income inequality, so that we can make a more informed decision about what would make sense for us as an investor.
Okay, because I'm a little confused
Yes.
about this second bullet point on the bottom, initial conclusions from the abstract. Economic gains
Yes.
may have shifted from labor to owners. What does that exactly mean?
So those were the conclusions that Brad Barber presented back to the board.
Okay.
He did have studies that looked at how sources of income inequality, including that economic gains within companies have shifted more to share owners than to labor. That was one of the conclusions. Some of the
Economic
academics-
inequalities? Say that again?
Oh, so one of, I think more than one of the studies that Brad Barber covered when he presented to the board and conducted the series research concluded that gains, so the economic gains of individual companies, for instance, and industries looks like they've shifted to the owners of the capital, so share owners like CalPERS,
Right.
rather than to the employees. And so that was one way that he was working to, or the papers were trying to explain a rise of income inequality.
If I understand it, his work did not include a lot of the work that has been done outside of academia, and that you want to supplement the record
Yes.
because there are certain things that it missed.
That's exactly
potentially.
right.
Yeah.
Yes.
So we're just supplementing everything, and then is there a goal at the end of that?
The goal is to understand the issue from an investor perspective and understand how this could affect our portfolio risk and returns. And if we have strong evidence that it looks like it will, and we have thoughts on how CalPERS might decide to intercede either through engagement with companies, or maybe it's through policy, or just understanding our portfolio and how this might be a risk for us in terms of how we might decide to make investment decisions, we will come back with a plan for that. But we're still in the fact-finding stage.
So we're looking at how long?
So we hope to come in March to when we do our sort of annual review to give an update to the board.
So about nine months, I guess? A little over 7 months or 8 months. And the reason I'm just a little concerned about it is we were kind of looking at having some sort of conclusions before that. And then the whole morning session was talking about the S of ESG and what happens if labor is innovated out of existence in their jobs, et cetera, and what that impact will be on our communities and our tax base and our consumer base. So I'm a little concerned that we're still I'm sorry, my brain is dying this afternoon. In the research stage and not really in some sort of, are we still, like, if we're seeing things, are we still in the S of ESG and the supply chain or labor, are we still kind of engaging with our investment managers, et cetera?
Related to the supply chain?
Yeah, related to the supply chain or labor or,
Well, on this,
because it's not exactly inequality, but it still kind of refers to inequality. Because, I mean, we have a lot of wage issues, we have wage theft issues, we have wage inequality issues.
Okay.
Are we dealing with those?
So related to that, I guess I would say that, I took over the program in April, so I sort of am looking at things from where they are, and I do think additional work needs to be done to answer these questions, and to look at, for instance, the top one here, which is, does more inclusive prosperity help economic growth and drive investment returns? That's sort of a big picture issue about trying to understand the magnitude of income inequality. But the other thing I don't think we've done yet that I'm working on doing with the team is also looking at, well, what are we already doing to address this issue? And looking at all the different ways. For instance, the CEO pay ratio, how we've pushed for disclosure on that. Also our responsible contractor policy. And putting that all together to say, what are we already doing to look at this issue, and what additional things could we potentially be doing?
Okay.
So that's part of it. So it just does involve, I think, additional work. But I do look forward to coming back and updating you more fully on that.
You've got a strategy working forward. I see it taking a little longer, and I always feel like we're just not fast enough, but that's okay.
Ms. Jelliapos, did you want to address that question also?
Is this on? Okay,
Yes.
I didn't get the red light. So I just add a couple of things. One, the strategic plan is still in full force and effect, so engagements on supply chain are still occurring, our human capital management still working, the responsible contractor policy is still going. The income inequality piece on our strategic plan were actions if warranted based on our research. And as Beth listed here and discussed, the initial conclusions from just the academic research really didn't provide us any empirical data upon which to do something other than the area of public policy advocacy. which is an area that there would be, great benefits to public policy changes to address some of the issues around income inequality. We didn't find in those academic papers any data, any conclusions from that data that would lead us to say, do this with the portfolio or avoid that with the portfolio. In fact, that point about gains, economic gains, inuring to the benefit of the owners of these companies. We saw the benefits of those disproportionate share of economic benefit going to the owners versus labor, but those also present perhaps risk for the future on the economic conditions upon which companies will prosper. So that's why Beth and her team are really stepping in to say, well, where are there other studies that we could look at that might pinpoint opportunities within the portfolio for us to think about either disproportionate risks that are within the portfolio or opportunities that we're not taking advantage of, and very purposefully under Beth's leadership to focus on technology disruption, which she identified upon taking the job as one of the areas that we should focus our attention, and that's very, very deeply linked to income inequality, as the morning sessions, as you underscored today, are demonstrating. So that research work will benefit us in thinking if there are things that we can do with the overall portfolio or within portions of the portfolio going forward, and that's why it's taking time.
Okay. Thanks. Mr. Rubalcaba, did you have a question? Okay.
I don't know how. I'm trying to turn it off. I don't know how to turn it off.
Okay. Thank you. All right. Are there any other questions from the board? Are there any concluding comments you want to offer, Ms. Rickman?
Well, thank you all for listening, and we're really excited in the Sustainable Investment team about this new vision and rolling this out, and we hope that we can build a program that's really useful as a resource to helping the investment office just be a better investor. I mean, that's the goal. Thank you.
Terrific. Well, that concludes our meeting for the day. We've had some truly outstanding discussions, I think, concerning our investment strategies, and we've learned a great deal from our teams as well as our very esteemed visiting presenters. Let's take just a moment to give today's presenters a round of applause for their efforts. Clearly, all of you put a great deal of work in to prepare and present your material. So on behalf of the board, many, many thanks. And thanks to all of our stakeholders who are in attendance for your continued interest and active involvement. For those in our audience, we'll begin again tomorrow at 9 a.m. here in this room. And for members of the board and executive team, please fill out your surveys. Have a great evening.